Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Honor Feedy, and I am a staff person in the Professional Development Services Department at NAESP. I'd like to welcome you all to this afternoon's webinar entitled Common Core State Standards, a Focus on Implementation. We are very pleased to offer this with this is a second part of a two-part series with Kenny Jones and Lucille Davy. They are coming back to us, and we had a very good first session with them, and we're looking forward to what they're going to share with us today on the Common Core. Kenny Jones is NAESP Zone 7 Director and Principal of Parkside Elementary School. Kenny offers a lot of practitioner wisdom and experience, and I hope that you'll get a lot from what he has to say to us on what principals should be doing with the Common Core. Lucille Davies is the Senior Advisor on the James B. Hunt Institute for Educational Leadership and Policy, and she has an extensive background in Common Core state implementation, and she provides a wealth of experience and strategies for implementing the Common Core. So with that said, that introduction, I'd like to introduce our speakers. Let me remind everyone that we will be the way we will be handling this webinar is that we'll be taking questions. We won't be having hand raised or audio, but if you'd like to ask a question, I really strongly encourage you to use the question box on your panel. Open that up and then type in some questions. We'll have periodically places within the webinar where we'll take questions. So please use that, and we will look forward to your comments. If we get too many questions, we may have to save them to the end, but one way or another, we will get your questions answered. So with that, Lucille, I'll give it over to you.
Thank you, Honor. I'm delighted to be here this afternoon. If we could start with the first slide. We're going to talk a little bit first about some key shifts in the mathematics standards. The last webinar that we did was a more general overview of the standards, but we're going to get into a little bit more detail, talk about some changes in the standards, and also how that would impact what happens in classrooms. The three key shifts are around focus, coherence, and rigor. You know, focus is really the most important. It is about limiting the number of topics at each grade level. It allows more time to be spent on each concept, so that students can develop a deeper understanding. And they're not just memorizing procedures or facts in mathematics, but rather they begin to really internalize the mathematics, the principles of mathematics that underlie what they're doing. With respect to coherence, these standards are built from progressions, which means that students should be able to see the connections between what they've learned in the past, in prior grades, and what they are learning currently, and that the mathematics should all make sense to them. The concepts should be connected both within as well as across grades. So teachers will also see how the skills that they're teaching at a particular grade level fit into the larger body of mathematics learning that students will do from kindergarten through grade 12. Rigor is broken down into three components, really. The first is procedural fluency. And you know, this focuses on the fact that the math facts must be mastered by students, that they need to have facility with them, particularly in the upper grades as they get to more rigorous mathematics, more complicated mathematics. They need to be able to know quickly from internal mastery the factors of a number, so that when they're factoring in algebra, they know how to find the factors of 20 and what combinations they might use together. They can certainly use calculators later, but the idea is that the arithmetic facts must be mastered, and we'll talk a little bit more in detail about fluencies in just a couple minutes. Conceptual understanding, however, is balanced with this idea of procedural and fact fluency, and that is that students really need to understand the mathematics behind those procedures and behind the computations that they do. That these elements come together, but they have to understand why the property of the distributive property rather works with respect to whole numbers and also with respect to fractions. They need to understand the mathematics behind that. And then finally, we need to do more to help students see how the mathematics applies to everyday life and to real-world problems. And so there's a real focus on actually applying what you've learned in mathematics to everyday problem solving. If we can go to the next slide, this shows you a picture of the typical state standards, the traditional approach that states have had from kindergarten through 12th grade with respect to how the standards were written. And so we had basically these 4 strands: numbers and operations, measurement and geometry, algebra and functions, and statistics and probability. And they may have been named a little bit differently in one state or another, but in generally there were these 4 strands, and they went through from kindergarten through 12th grade. There's lots of repetition. There's no clear points where the skills, such as arithmetic, computation, actually have to be mastered and finally come to an end. Instead, these things just continue. You'll see in the next slide the change in the way the Common Core Standard approaches this. If you can move to the next slide, you'll see that the strands differ, and these are just basically to the left side of your screen, K-8, and then the high school is the long green box showing algebra. The Common Core mathematics standards have true endpoints. So there are certain places at certain grades where students are expected to have mastered the content, and they won't continue to receive instruction on those topics after that particular grade level. And the goal, of course, then is to get students all prepared for algebra no later than 9th grade. They certainly can be prepared to do algebra sooner than 9th grade, but all students should be prepared to do that no later than 9th grade. And so you can see from this picture that operations and algebraic thinking go from kindergarten through the 5th grade, and then that gets extended into expressions and equations in the middle grade, 6 through 8. Numbers and operations in base 10, similarly in K through 5, and then fractions and begin really in grade 3, ending in grade 5, and then in grade 6 through 8, students put the base 10 and the fractions together to develop an understanding of the number system. So these standards are focused in a way that there are limited topics at each grade level, but then there's an endpoint where students are expected to have mastered those skills so that they need no further instruction. They can build upon that then in the later grades. The next slide shows a summary of the major topics that get focused on in the different either grade levels or grade bands. So K through 2, major focus on addition and subtraction, the concepts and the skills around that, the properties of addition, problem solving using simple addition and subtraction. And then in grades 3 through 5, students really move to master multiplication and division of whole numbers and fractions, the concepts and the skills, and problem solving using those computation, multiplication and division, and also using the fractions, which extends then, of course, beyond whole numbers. In the 6th grade, they move to ratios and proportional relationships, and then they begin to do just the starting work around equations. And then they're building upon that through the 7th grade as they begin to study ratios and proportional relationships. And then they move into linear algebra and linear functions, which really then in 8th grade gives them that final set of skills that finishes the building of the foundation for success in the algebra that will follow. The next slide shows an example of coherence. And, you know, we talk about coherence as being able to make explicit connections both within the grade level and from one grade level to the next. This example shows you of how multiplication and division becomes a coherent teaching and learning concept in the 3rd grade. So multiplication and division is connected to area. If you think about it, area of a rectangle is really just the length times the width. So we show students, by teaching them area at the same time as multiplication and division, we show them how those two concepts connect. Similarly, they learn about how multiplication and division connects to the properties of operations, such as the distributive property. Next slide gives you an example of rigor a moment ago on the fluency and the conceptual understanding. But it really is a focus on developing a deep conceptual understanding and not just a set of procedures. So it's not that students learn how to multiply a 3-digit number by a 2-digit number just remembering what the steps are. It is really understanding the mathematics that underlies that. This problem below gives you an example of a way that deeper conceptual understanding can be developed. Now, the first line of that example, 514 equals blank hundreds plus blank tens plus blank ones, is a typical of the kind of example that you would see in a United States textbook today. In fact, in many cases, students would be given an entire page of numbers that would look like that first line, the first example. So, you know, they'd be all different numbers, but they'd be done the same way, blank hundreds plus blank tens plus blank ones. Now, the second two examples really demonstrate a deeper conceptual understanding. For the student to answer 51 tens and 4 ones for the second line, the student has to really understand what tens mean and then how that relates to hundreds. So there has to be a much better understanding of place value as the students are tackling the second and the third examples. So that's how they would develop this deeper conceptual understanding, is doing more than just the simplest arithmetic, but rather going into the concept in a much deeper way. Now I have a slide. The next slide is shows you the fluencies, and it really marks out the endpoints of learning. So this shows you when students need to have actually internalized, mastered the specific computational skills. So you can see in kindergarten it's expected that students can add and subtract within 5, and they need to master that by the end of kindergarten. By the end of first grade, that extends to within 10, and then by second grade it goes up to 20. So they've got to be able to add and subtract and know those single-digit sums from memory. They have to have internalized it and be fluent with those by the end of second grade. And then you can see as we progress up, we go through, and in the 5th grade, students have to be able to know how you multiply multiple digit numbers together. By 6th grade, multi-digit division. Now, what I want to point out is these grade fluencies don't show you when you begin teaching those skills, but rather these are the endpoints at which those skills are developed over time, and the endpoint at which those students should have mastered those skills. They should no longer need, for example, instruction in multi-digit multiplication after grade 5. So the 6th grade teacher should know with confidence that students in the classroom have mastered all those fluencies that precede 6th grade. The next slide shows us an example of how students apply skills, their math skills, into problem solving. Now, you know, with the Common Core standards, those problems need to become increasingly more complex. And this problem actually gives you an example that's probably more difficult and more complex than what is found on most state tests right now. Most state tests today would ask just the first step or the first question or an obvious question, instead of having a problem like this, which is more complex, which requires not only multiple steps, but also some critical thinking in order to solve it. Students need to be doing more problems like this one throughout the school year. And, you know, that's one of the places where instructional materials will really have to change, because the kind of skills that students need to master will require more complex and critical thinking. And the tests will reflect that as well. So the instructional materials and the practice that students get throughout the school year should match those kind of skills. Now, to summarize on the next page, we just want to talk for a minute about how math instruction in your elementary school classrooms will need to change. Of course, you'll need to have a greater focus on the grade level math concepts. There will be fewer concepts at each grade level, so each teacher will be asked to teach fewer concepts, but to a deeper mastery and to deeper understanding. They'll use the math practices with new focus. And of course, the math practices connect to the math content standards. And it's really, it's a set of standards about how you go about teaching the mathematics, helping students to become mathematical thinkers, the habits of mind, to persevere in the mathematics work that they do. In addition, students, as I said, will need to learn how to apply those math skills to real world problems. And of course, we'll need to increase the rigor of the problems that students deal with as they're working through not only their work throughout the school year, but of course the test will reflect that as well. And then finally, the point that I made earlier, students will need to develop fluency with the mathematics facts before they begin using calculators. And certainly calculators are expected to be used as students get into those upper grades. But at the beginning, they really do need to master those facts first. So at this point, Honor, before I go on to ELA, do we have any questions that we ought to answer around mathematics?
Here's a question. We wanted to find out if you could give us some idea of when guidance will be given on how a school should incorporate these changes in terms of the math practices. You mentioned increasing the rigor of the problems. What kind of guidance would you give for folks on that?
Well, a couple things. First of all, most of the states are working on either writing model curriculum or bringing teachers and school leaders and supervisors together to write curriculum. Some of the states do a state-level curriculum. Others leave it for districts to work, district by district. So I think you want to think about how that curriculum changes, the writing of the curriculum as it changes to reflect and be aligned with the Common Core state standards, how that work is being done. There are certainly good examples online of work that's being done in some of the states. Massachusetts and New York State are two that come to mind. Kentucky, Indiana, Maryland have lots of resources online for teachers to see examples. In addition, we'll give you some links. I believe we have some links at the end, and if not, I think they're connected to the PowerPoint from the last webinar, but the Illustrative Math Project out of the University of Arizona gives teachers lots of examples. They're actually examples written by teachers to see what do these standards mean in practice and how can the standard be taught, an example of a problem that can be used to teach a specific standard. So there are lots of resources out there. We can certainly provide you with a good list of links on her that you can circulate to folks on the webinar afterwards.
If these are meant to be common state standards, then how can a state such as Pennsylvania leave it up to 501 different districts to write their own curriculum? Where's the commonality in that?
Well, that's the beauty of these standards, though. The standards are the expectations of the skills that students need to master and the knowledge they need to learn at a particular grade level. But how you go about doing that really is the purview of the local educators, whether it's on the state level, which some states choose to do, or on a district-by-district basis, which many states choose to do. The curriculum is really the how you teach these skills. There is no disagreement or no way to vary from what students need to learn. That's what the standards specify. But the exact way that you get that really is to be left up to local decision making. At the end, it's the mastery of the skill that's contained in the Common Core standard that really matters. But how you do that and what materials you use to get there is really left in the hands of local educators. The standards were designed so that there could be different approaches taken, and certainly districts have done this in the past. I do think, though, that many of the states are writing model curriculum aligned to the Common Core state standards that could be followed and adhered to exactly, or that could be used and tailored by a local district depending on how the district wanted to proceed. But this is the kind of thing where teachers really should come together, where the principal should work with the teachers as a learning community together to decide how best do we teach these standards to the particular group of students that we serve. Because for some students, you may take a different approach. In some schools, the decision might be to use a certain set of books or a certain set of materials. You want to make sure that educators can continue to make those decisions. But certainly, they need to be materials that are aligned to the Common Core standards, and you certainly want a curriculum that's aligned. But I think there will be lots of good examples of model curriculum that people can use throughout the country that will be aligned to these standards. And those resources are also available, and many of them are clearly open source and accessible to you. No matter where you are, you can certainly go and look and see what New York State has worked on, or what California is working on, or what they're doing in Utah, or what they've done in Massachusetts. It's an opportunity that comes from having common standards that really gives us a wonderful ability to exchange the work that we're doing not only in different states but also in different districts.
Thank you, Lucille. And NAESP is really going to try to have a resource site for the Common Core where we're going to put up good practices, everything that we see. So please stay tuned to our website as you move forward with this. But anyway, I think that's the end of the questions. I'll turn it back to you, Lucille.
Okay, let's go on to the English language arts then. We'll just talk briefly about some of the key shifts. We went over these in the last webinar. There's lots of information about this. Text complexity really focused on the research that's very clear that the complexity of what students read is equally important as to how well the material is read. And so we really need to pay closer attention to increasing complexity as students go from kindergarten up through 12th grade. The second point is this idea of balancing literature and fiction with informational text. So students should be exposed to nonfiction and informational-based texts in order to help them build background knowledge. In an elementary school classroom, certainly it allows the teacher to bring, in a self-contained classroom, to bring those other content areas back in and use those other content areas to develop literacy skills. So for example, you can read a book about fish or a book about trees and be learning some science while you're also developing your literacy skills. The final point then is really about writing and how the Common Core state standards expand writing beyond narratives of personal opinion or experiences and really require that students write to inform or persuade and to be able to use evidence from text to support their persuasion or their information. And this is one of those shifts that also allows you to do writing in those other content areas. So children can be writing in science and social studies, in the arts, but still developing those critical writing skills that are expected as part of the literacy standards. The next slide focuses a bit on text complexity, and I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here. This is certainly material that's readily available and accessible. This is taken from the Kansas State Department of Education ELA resources, and again, so many states have developed wonderful resources for you. The link to this particular one is right on this slide. There's also information about how you determine text complexity right in the standards documents themselves. I would caution you not to overread this. It is really important that there's no one saying here that third graders should read Shakespeare, but really that we should pay attention to text complexity and make sure that it is increasing as students progress through the grades. But you want to use those quantitative measures, the Lexile scores, the accelerated reader scores. There are many other measures that have really been done. Best done, by the way, with a machine actually just looking at the text and making a quantitative determination. At the same time, though, the second leg of that stool is really the qualitative measures. And they need to be done by a human, a person actually reading it, a professional who understands meaning and structure and language conventions. And that really is best left to our teachers who are experts who can really import their professional judgment into this decision making. And then finally we look at the third leg of the stool, which is the reader and task considerations. So understanding the students in the classroom, the students who are going to actually read the material, and using a professional judgment. So you're really taking these three pieces together in determining whether or not a text is of sufficient complexity but also appropriate for the particular group of students. I think you will see that there are some books that on the quantitative measures appear to be appropriate for grades that seem to be lower than from a qualitative review or a reader consideration review, are not appropriate. So a book like Lord of the Flies, might be at a lower grade level, but it's really most appropriate at the high school level from the qualitative and the reader and task consideration point of view. There are examples, really good examples of the texts that are adequately complex, both in the fiction and literature area as well as the nonfiction area, located in Appendix A to the ELA standards. So let's talk for a minute about how instruction in your classrooms should change given these new standards. If we can go to the next slide, we'll see that you really need to pay more attention to a better balance between literature and informational text. And that's in every classroom. At the elementary level, you really want it to be 50-50 of fiction and literature and informational text. Again, still building literacy skills, but using informational text in other content areas to help build that background knowledge for students, and also to engage readers who may not be as interested in fictional stories but may really like books that are more science or history oriented. Reading and writing, again, based on evidence. So not tossing out the idea of writing narratives, but rather expanding writing to include writing to inform or persuade. And you want your teachers to begin to do that from the youngest grades. This is something that young children can also do. Certainly, you want to begin to think about how can you work with text differently in the classroom. And you want to change the kind of questions that are asked of students as they are reading. Those questions should be much more focused on the text itself, on what is written in the text, asking them to give evidence when they give an answer. And instead of doing what many of us have done in the past, asking them what they think or how they feel about what they've read, instead focusing them much more on the words that they have read, the understanding of those words, and really requiring that they read closely and that they demonstrate an understanding of what they've read. All content teachers, and if you are in buildings where you have teachers who specialize in a particular subject area, you want those other content area teachers to be teaching literacy skills in their content areas. From grades 6 and up, the standards actually do specify literacy in the science, social studies, and technical subjects. So there are specific literacy standards for those other content areas from grade 6 through grade 12. These standards also require that speaking and listening and technology skill development all are integrated into literacy skills and the skill development. So you want to be sure that students have a chance to speak in front of their peers, to do some research and presentations for one another, to work together and to learn how to listen to one another. So those are critical skills that really go beyond perhaps some of what we may have been focusing on in our current state standards. The next slide talks just briefly a little bit about what school leaders can think about doing right now. How can you begin, even if your state has not begun implementation, what can you begin to do to start that transition, to begin the migration from where you are today to what the Common Core standards will require of the students in your schools? I would say utmost, first and foremost, is to provide time for teachers to work together, both to work with the standards, to look at the standards and to see what that means, how that changes. For example, in mathematics, how there will be a much narrower focus at each grade level, and how they will teach for deeper understanding. You want to be reviewing your existing materials. You want to make sure that your texts are of sufficient complexity as students are going from kindergarten up through 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th grade, etc. You definitely want to be very careful before you purchase new materials, and you want to be sure that they're aligned to your new state standards. Many, many people are saying our materials are aligned, and they're putting little labels on and saying everything you need to have, that's in your new standards is in our materials. At the end of the day, that may or may not be true. That will vary, I think, by materials. But at the end of the day, those materials, if they haven't really been revised and redone, those materials are not likely to be just aligned to your Common Core standards and not to have a lot of other stuff, for lack of a better term, in them. And you really do want the materials to be just totally focused and aligned on what you want your teachers to be teaching and your students to be learning. So, in the mathematics area, for example, I don't think that there's any set of materials yet that is fully aligned and really just about what's included in the Common Core state standards. So before you spend any new money, I would be really careful. Really important to make sure that materials are aligned to the Common Core standards. It is, it is really easy for a publisher to put a little label on the front and say, these are aligned because everything that needs to be taught is in there somewhere. You really, if you're going to spend new money on materials, you really want to be sure that those materials are aligned to the Common Core standards and that there isn't a lot of other stuff in there that isn't in the standards and that doesn't need to be taught at that particular grade level. There's no reason for children to carry around an 800-page book if they only need, 200 pages of what's in there. And so before you make any purchases, think about ensuring that there's close alignment. This is a place where having common standards should really help us. There are lots of publishers who are working on revising materials so that they are very closely linked and aligned to the Common Core standards. But states and districts will also be able to share what they know about these materials as they review them, as they find materials that are really closely aligned, as teachers design lessons that are closely aligned. All of that can be shared, and that's a real advantage of having common standards. Professional development, as a principal, you should be thinking about how do you focus your professional development where it's needed. If there are concepts that need to be taught at a grade level now in the elementary school in mathematics that teachers haven't taught in the past and they're not comfortable with those concepts, then but also in being able to teach to those standards. And then finally, there are lots of opportunities to work with partners.
I know this area is probably one of the biggest things. Please stay tuned to the NAESP website. We will be having some further webinars on the Common Core with once Smarter Balance and PARC have come out with their assessments and their action guides. We hope to provide further details and information on that.
Okay, this is Kenny. I'm going to pick up now and would like to let folks know that this particular section of the webinar for me is somewhat futuristic because we're as most areas we're just jumping into this and headed forward. So when I was looking for a framework to kind of tie our Common Core State Standard Transition Plan together, last week I was reading the Communicator magazine from NAESP, and they had what I felt was a pretty good Common Core implementation checklist. So it saved me from having to redesign a wheel here. So I swiped their framework, and I'm going to go through that framework and let you know what I am doing, because as I see this and what I've read and the work I've done, it seems to be spot on for me. So the areas I'm going to talk about are on the screen: leadership, professional development, implications for student learning, capacity building, and then considerations for your school and conclusions about implementation in your school. So next slide, on to leadership, awareness, building, and communication. One thing that we've already done here at Parkside is, and I think probably the most important piece for the principal with the staff, is that we have to set a vision for getting to the Common Core State Standards. And what I don't believe is a good vision is the fact that our state has adopted these standards and we don't have an option. The approach that we have taken is that we looked at the Common Core State Standards, we read through them and looked at crosswalks and gap analysis, and in taking a look at what we're currently doing and what's presented before us, we think it's a good next step. It's an improvement on what we're doing. So through that process, I was able to get teacher buy-in with my staff. Like I said, we've reviewed some crosswalk work, gap analysis work with our stuff, and so we've explored the ways to do that. Now we're just kind of, okay, which way do we go? Do we go up or down? Do we jump in with both feet? Do we stick a toe in and see how it's going? And then the thing, allow time for incubation, I think is going to be my big push in our district. Is I think that is going to be about the most important thing we do over the next year, because we do have some time. I mean, it's not like we can sit and wait by any means, but I think we do have some time to actually, what I would prefer to do is allow my teachers to jump in and just take off with it. They have a timeline or a pacing guide as to what they believe they'll be able to get covered in the first trimester, second and third trimester next year. And I would just like to kind of lift a little bit of load or take the pressure off of them a little bit and just have them take a shot at it, actually. Going back a little bit to what Lucille was mentioning about textbook companies all of a sudden say, hey, because you have our textbook, you have the Common Core covered, and I'm not so sure they do. I would hesitate to just put their rubber stamp on it as well. So it's something we're going to determine. We're going to determine if any series that we're currently using is or is not aligned to the Common Core, because I think it does depend on the curriculum and probably your state. The last bullet here, communicate changes to the Common Core with parents. One thing I've done, I meet with my parent group monthly, and what I've been just making sure that a little part of each agenda, communicating what are the Common Core. The biggest thing with my parent group was that it's not a federal or a national curriculum. It was developed by the Governors Association, chief state school officers, and I think that was their biggest concern, because they'd been hearing a lot of misinformation around them. So I think bit by bit I don't believe you want to just give them a whole big old Q&A or anything like that. I think it's best presented to the parents ahead of time, and then as the teachers are implementing it within the classrooms next year, I just foresee that those monthly updates continuing with the parents so that they understand what we're doing with the Common Core state standards. Let's go ahead and go on to the next screen on professional development, which right now this is probably my key focus right now, headed into this summer. Last year I was fortunate enough that I was able to gather information from my teachers. I had given them the Common Core standards and the crosswalk and the gap analysis, and they gave me plenty of feedback, some good feedback that we were able to use. You know, there was some fear involved in that, but I think over time we've got it down to where they understand the need for this, and I understand where they're coming from. And one thing is for sure, and I think it's probably nationwide, I don't think it's just particular to Parkside, is that professional development is going to be the key to any kind of positive implementation of the Common Core. So, what of course, and Lucille alluded to this earlier, and we did last month, but because of the Common Core, it really enhances the use of an inquiry-based approach. However, before that, though, with early elementary, I know there's that skills base that has to really be as well established, as Lucille mentioned earlier, before you can get to the inquiry-based approach where the kids are really taking on the responsibility, thinking differently, I think is something you will hear, and then So we have to certainly make sure those skills are in place pretty firmly before we get to any inquiry-based or project-based kind of approach to the Common Core. And again, just a little bit, Lucille covered this too, about the understanding of the changes in math, the conceptual understanding, the more of a focus and reasoning and mastery of the math Common Core state standards. And if you go to the next screen, next slide, please. What we have to do is, again, in English language arts, there's that text complexity. Rigor, that's the biggest word I think that we're focused on right now as we go through this. And I've been participating in a webinar series with Bob Marzano, and one thing that I picked up from one of his sessions in the area of rigor is that you really there you have to look at the depth of knowledge of that application. And so what we've been spending time on is taking a look at, whenever we're designing or working on lessons and any kind of assessments, be it formative or summative, that we're definitely have Bloom's taxonomy or Webb's in front of us, or the Krathwohl's taxonomy, I believe that's how you pronounce it. But we've also found some information from Common Core Institute on cognitive demand categories. So rigor's about the depth of knowledge. And one thing in Marzano's webinar they said is that it's not, however, is it doesn't mean that the kids just learn on their own or they get more homework, or it's not about forcing kids to take more core classes and less fine arts and PE. It's not about that at all. It's just that it's actually a practice within the classroom that we have to lift up that classroom, the expectation or the level of that which we're teaching our particular skills to the kids. So rigor is one that really we're focused on, and it's concerning to us because that's going to be a clear adjustment to us is to making sure we're at the correct level of difficulty when we're teaching. The shift of focus on.
I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Yep.
Can I interrupt for just a minute?
Absolutely.
We do have a question. They're just rolling in here. Somebody has a question about the crosswalk. What is the crosswalk that you mentioned?
Well, the crosswalk, what our State Department did for us is they took a look at the Common Core state standards here last year, and then they took a look at our current state assessment. And what they did was they they aligned, well, they looked at it from an alignment perspective, and they told us with our current state assessment, which would be our current standards that we're teaching toward, how well does our current state assessment align with that? So where do they cross? Where do they meet? Where are we good at? And then where are areas that the Common Core standards, you know, that we need to be covering that we're not? And then it also shows us other documents that you know, if we're covering something now that we don't have to worry about in, say, 3rd grade, maybe with the Common Core, it's in a different grade level. But if folks want to see Wyoming, then each will be different, but if they would just go to the Wyoming Department of Education and go to Programs, I think it's a Programs tab, and then click on Standards, and the crosswalk, and there's also a gap analysis in there that McCrell did to show us where there were gaps between what they saw as the Common Core state standards and our current state standards. Both were helpful for the teachers to see. They were time-consuming, they were not enjoyable, but actually they provided us some good information about where we are and where we need to go to. Any other questions?
Yes, well, here's another question. If we don't focus on those, I think we lose a wonderful opportunity to really impact instruction. I think they're referring to the slide we have right here. Would you agree with that, or would you comment on that?
On all that's on the slide right now?
Really impacting instruction, yes.
Yeah, I think with the text, yeah, with the complexity, rigor, shift on informational text and evidence-based support. Because for writing, one big change for writing for us, as an example, is argumentative, and we haven't done much of that to this point. So, but yeah, there have to be, you know, when kids write, they have to be able to take it, information from an informational text and write toward it. You know, they need to support their writings with that information.
I'm sorry, I'm referring there. They refer to the math practices. If you don't focus on those that relate to the math practices, we're missing.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, on the conceptual understanding, focus, reasoning, and mastery, those 4, Honor, do you believe?
Yes.
But I think yes, we have to, and for us, that's an area too that we're looking at. And one thing that my staff is going to do this summer, that I'm going to give them to read over the summer, so we can kind of do our book study when we come back in the fall, is there's a book, and of course I got this out of the Marzano webinar, but there's a book called Teaching and Assessing 21st Century Skills by Robert Marzano and Tammy Heffelbauer. And they're recommending it as a good book to read, to take a look at what kinds of instructional strategies need to be implemented to get us to these college and career ready standards. I have not read it myself, but based on you know, past practices with information coming from Marzano, it's one that I'm thinking will probably benefit us.
Mike, here's another comment from somebody. Mike Schmoker has 2 really good books that deal with argumentative, authentic literacy, and they're called Results Now and Focus, both of which are available from ASCD. So I think that's more of a comment for the group.
Yep, and they are good. I have read Schmoker's and heard him on. I have his Focus book, and yeah, it really does help you drill it down and be very focused on what you're wanting to get to kids at each particular grade level.
Okay, I think that's it.
Okay, then just if you could move on to this slide, then implications for student learning. And again, when we go through this, you know, of course, we're working with the PLC, and of course we focus on the learning. It's about the learning, and that's what we're trying to keep in the forefront. Is that so we've been working vertically with having teachers become aware of what's in the Common Core state standards, and then we've gone horizontally in the district, and then we're going vertically just to make sure that the teachers understand that, you know, there are some areas that may not have to be covered anymore in their grade level, and that right now I think is going to probably be one of the most difficult tasks we have, is to actually getting some folks to back off of some things that they have, you know, quote, always done, and and in doing so, convince them that, as Lucille mentioned, actually with the focus, there's actually there's fewer things to cover. We're going to maybe be able to go a mile deep and an inch wide instead of a mile wide and an inch deep like we have. That, I think, is going to be my greatest struggle with it. So as we go through, you know, you just need to work as a K5 or K6 or K8. In our district, we're small enough. We'll do K8 alignment in discussions with our staff, just so that we know that we don't want to replicate anymore. We want to, you know, there's a lot to get covered, and we don't want to be replicating skills. If we know at an end point in math, say, that a certain skill should be met by, then we need to hold fast to that and make sure that if it's supposed to be learned and internalized by the end of 3rd grade, that our 4th grade, 5th grade, and on up, do not have to worry about that teaching that skill. Something that we're still up in the air on and I'm working on too. It's an area that I don't feel comfortable in, is that determining plans for our English language learners and our students on IEPs, as well as our high-end gifted students. And I don't like the term gifted, but our kids that are well above. So basically, what I put on the bottom is just, you know, we're going to have to put together a plan, kind of rethink our at-risk plan as to when we implement these, what's that going to look like. And again, it goes back to what Lucille says. We have to evaluate the materials and resources we have. And one thing I've told staff is we're not buying anything until we know exactly what it is that we're shooting for. So kind of took the old, you know, well, this stuff is old, it doesn't work, and they may be correct, but I want them to try first what we have, see if what we have can't get us there, and then if not, then we will go ahead and begin looking at purchasing. But I do have to agree with Lucille wholeheartedly that don't just take that rubber stamp, aha, we have the Common Core answer for you. I think you want to take a look at it yourself.
Okay, again, there was one question about the name of the book and author that you were talking about. I believe you mentioned Mike Schmoker.
Well, Schmoker was one that another member out there. But what I'm going to have my staff do a read on this summer, and then we'll kind of break it down next fall. It's called Teaching and Assessing 21st Century Skills, and it is by Bob Marzano and Tammy Heffelbauer. It's also an ASCD book, I believe.
Great. I will also post that as a comment for people. So
okay.
I think that's it.
Okay. Then on to capacity building. And again, are you planning job-embedded professional development? We are. I've got I put together a Common Core team, I guess. I've got 7 people this summer that will be attending a workshop put on by our State Department, and then there's a group, actually our district is taking a group out because our superintendent and assistant superintendent have listened to and have found a group that we're gonna do a lot of work with, and that is called the Common Core Institute. Kevin Baird and Peg Porcheller are I think the top guns, I guess, in the group. And so we're going to have a group going out to Chicago for their national conference on college and career readiness and Common Core state standards. And so I think, again, professional development is just so key that, you know, right now, because I've been in education longer than I should say, probably 30 years, been 19 years as a principal, and I've never really seen an unknown like right now, because it seems like it's just a tsunami coming at us, and I don't like not knowing, I guess, to tell you the truth. So professional development, we're just scattering about. We're spending a lot of time reading, which isn't the most enjoyable or fun, but we're utilizing the web a lot. And the one true piece about the Common Core, again, Lucille talked about, is, you know, the Common Core is the Common Core, and you can nearly go out to any State Department or do a search and look at different websites, and there's tons of information out there. And so what we're looking at then is when this team comes back next fall, they're gonna present back to the staff, and we're just gonna kind of take the gloves off and we're gonna jump into it, and I'm sure we're gonna crash and burn a couple times, but we're gonna get up and dust off and we're gonna go again. So and all along the way, of course, we're gonna look at the budget and staffing and planning and the continued professional development to how we're going to get all of this covered. One other thing that we've done with our superintendent and assistant soup has really helped us out is with the Common Core Institute. The Common Core Institute have deconstructed the standards, and for a price. I'm glad the district bought it. I haven't seen a price, but I can only imagine. They have purchased the standards deconstructed for us, so we can actually take a look at what, at the skills, individual skills within standards and domains, and hopefully that will help us to get a focus on where we're headed to. And then into the next slide, just to let you know, some resources that I've used that I use quite a bit is the Common Core checklist that I just presented to you is on the in the communicator, but www.achievethecore.org really has, I think, some good information. There's some information on creating text-dependent questions. They have information on the key instructional shifts of the Common Core for math, like focus, coherence, rigor. They have a couple of white papers called the Publisher's Criteria for the Common Core State Standards in ELA and Literacy K2 and 312 that have been they've been helpful to us too, as just to kind of help us wrap our minds around it. And then of course the commoncoreinstitute.org, that's one I don't know if you have the opportunity, and I'm not getting a kickback by any means, but that's where my team is going. And I was able to attend a one-day workshop from these folks last week, and that's why my team is going there. I was convinced they seem to be pretty well on top of where the direction our district is going. And I too, again, Bob Marzano, the Marzano Research Laboratory webpage is a free webpage too that just has a lot of information on Common Core implementation. And actually the 4-part webinar series, I believe, is recorded and on there, and you can go and you can listen to any or all of them, and they're free.
What would be a good introductory step this summer? That's beautiful. I love it. A shorter read than reading the entire standards book. I mean, from Lucille and Kenny, what would be your first step recommendation for folks?
For me, I think in the area of English language arts, I would go to Achieve and take a look at those, the revised criteria for the Common Core State Standards in ELA by David Coleman and Susan Pimentel. They're both there. They've just been newly revised back in April 12th, I believe. And they're white papers, so they're not lengthy, but I think they would give folks a good introduction to the ELA Common Cores. And actually, I think anything on that achieve.org site would be good for folks to look at as an initial small step.
And I would recommend that folks go to Bill McCallum's website at the University of Arizona. It's under illustrativemathematics.org. And he's got the progressions in mathematics, so teachers through some well-written documents can see how the math concepts progress through the grade levels, how they connect both within the grades and to grades before and after. I think that's a great starting place for the mathematics work.
Another place too for folks who are into TED Talks. For those that are into TED Talks in the area of math, I saw Dan Meyer, I believe it's called Math Class Needs a Makeover. or math curriculum makeover, something like that. But if you go to TED Talks and search for Dan Meyer, M-Y-E-R, he's got a nice little, oh, I don't know, 10-minute or so overview of math. I thought it was very eye-opening. It was good. And I too, Lucille is correct. I've been going to McCallum's website a little bit too, looking at examples of what's out there.
Are we able to see any science subject standards anytime sooner? It will be part of the language arts sections for a while.
I can tell you I'm unaware of any, because of where we are with K5. I know with the literacy standards, written in the content areas, the other areas, but I haven't heard anything about science at all coming down at our level.
There's work that 26 states are doing right now, just the states themselves, on creating next generation science standards together, those 26 states. But that work is in the early drafting stages. So I don't think there's very much at this point. You could get some ideas from the drafts, but they're at the first, I believe they're out for the first round of comments right now, so they're really in an early stage. And it is only about half the states in the nation that are working on that together. But there's a website, Next Generation Science Standards. I'm not exactly sure. I think if you Google Next Generation Science Standards, you'll probably be able to find information related to that, or perhaps on your own state website with regard to your own state standards.
Okay, here's another one. Is there any timeline for textbook companies to publish Common Core aligned science textbooks / worksheets, etc.?
I'm not aware of any.
Yeah, I don't think there's a timeline. I mean, look, I think they're all working on it because they know that people want to buy materials that are aligned, and that states are in various stages of implementation in terms of what grades they're beginning to implement in and when they're actually starting implementation. So folks are looking for these materials sooner than later. I did speak with someone from Singapore Math at the NCTM conference a couple weeks ago in Philadelphia, and she indicated that Singapore Math is redesigning and republishing and revising their math series that's used in the United States, and it'll be ready for use in classrooms in September of 2013. So that's still, probably a year or so away. But I know they are on that timeline to be ready for next September.
Wonderful. Here's another question. What are some simple resources for parents or pieces to put in a newsletter? What would you recommend?
I would say that the National PTA has some excellent materials that they've prepared. If you do pta.org, I believe is the National PTA's website, and they have grade-by-grade informational pamphlets for parents that can be shared. They also have other resources for parents. I put a note in the chat box. The Hunt Institute has videos, YouTube videos, some of which could be used at a PTA meeting to give parents an introduction to what the standards mean, why standards like these that are really more rigorous and more demanding are necessary for our students for success in the 21st century workforce and to prepare them for careers and for post-secondary education, including 2- and 4-year colleges. Those links are in the last webinar's set of resources, and I'm sure, Honor, that you could circulate those to and post them on the website as well.
What would you suggest for ideas on nonfiction writing in middle and high school?
You got me. Not ending at 5th grade. I don't know. I haven't worked much with our middle school principal on what they're looking at at the middle school level writing.
Lucille, do you have any ideas?
I'd like to refer the National Council of Teachers of English has published a really good series of books. It goes K2, 3, 5, 6, 8, and then 9, 12, written by teachers that talks, the series in each of them talk about how teachers can implement Common Core standards, and reading and writing, obviously, being part of literacy, both included in there. So I would highly recommend taking a look at that series of books. That's available, I believe, through NCTE's website. And the National Center for Literacy Education is opening tomorrow, or I guess they're doing a kickoff. I think it's already been established, but there's a kickoff event tomorrow in Washington, and there'll be lots of resources around literacy available through the National Center as well. There are many organizations dedicated to improving student literacy that are working together to help bring that to fruition. So I would say, again, Google National Center for Literacy Education, but check out that series of books. Sarah Brown Westling, who was one of the recent National Teachers of the Year, she's a high school English teacher, I think out in Iowa. She actually was a major contributor to the high school book on implementing Common Core standards. And it's a terrific resource. Sarah, some people may be familiar with her. She's an incredible speaker, has really distinguished herself, obviously, as an educator to be National Teacher of the Year, but has a lot to offer. She's also got several videos up on the Teaching channel, and that's another great resource, by the way. The Teaching channel has lots of videos, vignettes that show examples of implementing Common Core standards, good teaching practices, ways to incorporate writing to inform and argue, and that kind of thing as well.
Great, thank you so much. We also, and one of the participants wrote in another resource for you all to know about, and it's called http://illustrativemathematics.org. So we will definitely put that up there too for you. Well, with that said, thank you, Lucille. Thank you, Kenny. We really appreciate the expertise that you brought to this important topic. And we look forward to future webinars around the Common Core this summer. As soon as Smarter Balance and Park have come out with some stuff, we're going to be posting a new webinar on that. Also, just so you know, we are in partnership with Solution Tree to present a few webinars. Our next one is Tuesday, May 22nd. That one's on Essentials for Principals, Effective Program Evaluation with authors Dawn Billings and Marsdale Dunworth. And then on June 5th, we'll have another one with Solution Tree on Essential for Principals, Database Decision Making. So with that said, thank you all very much for your time this afternoon.